fruition with Sidekick Home. So Florentine, I'm going to let you take it off from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rita. So I'm so glad to be back with you guys. I feel like we covered really a lot of ground a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about ADU legislative updates. And I do want to just, before we dive into new information, I've got a lot of just really great, if you think about when you got your real estate license, there was the principles class and then the practice class. So last week was like principles, this week is practice. So it's really, we're not going to get a lot into, can you do this on a property? Can you do that on a property? Because that was a couple weeks ago. Now what we really want to talk about is, how does this affect your transactions? How does this affect your buyers, your sellers, and your investors? And how can you really be a pro for them? So before we get started on that, what I do want to say though, is that I had promised for the last class that I was going to send people all of the information, all of the ADU update information that we've gone through in that class. And I haven't yet. So what happened is my emails got flooded with like 100 one by one requests for this. So I created a solution on my website. I have a realtors only tab, which I'm going to show you guys in a little bit, that will allow you guys, if you just send me your email address through that link, I can mass send everybody everything all at one time, because I haven't been able to keep up with all the one-on-one requests, and I do apologize for that. But we've been busy helping your clients with their immediate ADU needs. So anyhow, bear with me. I'll get you that link here a little bit later. But I do want to make sure that I honor my promise and get all the information out from the last class. As well as a lot of the information that we're going to be covering today as well. I want to make sure that you guys actually have that and are able to refer back to it. The better able you are to help your clients on the front end, the more successful we can be together in helping them achieve their ADU goals. All right, so are we ready to kick it off, Rita?
Let's get going. And what a way to pivot too. I'm happy to see that you got that high of a demand from this. So that means what we're doing is working. So again, I'm excited for your master class today. Let's get going.
Okay, awesome. Let's not waste an ounce of time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me make sure I've got the correct presentation up here. And let me go ahead here and share screen so you guys can all look at what I'm looking at. All right, so today is just really how to be a pro for your clients. And I'm really just wanting to help set people up to be that knowledgeable ADU force when working with your real estate clients. So just an overview of what we're going to cover today as we get going, because you guys are going to have a lot of questions, and I just want you to rest assured that a lot of your questions will be answered. So we are going to be, this is what we're going to be covering. We're going to be differentiating the different types of terminology, difference between ADU versus junior ADU, ADU versus like a property with an ADU versus a duplex. What is the difference there? What are the construction options? So people oftentimes have questions about prefab. What are the different options for prefab? What are the things to consider there? Taking a design build approach versus design bid build. What is the difference? How does that impact your clients? What is the cost to build? Probably the number one question I get regards to ADUs. And then how to choose your team. We're also going to talk about financing options. And this might be a great place, Fernando, please feel free to chime in when we get to this section. But there's our conventional financing, and then there's some alternative financing. And I really think it's very, very critical that realtors understand what all of the different alternative financing is that's going on out there, because in most cases, you're probably going to want to sway your client away from most of those because they can create problems for your client down the road. They can put some of the options, some of them are not bad, but some can actually put your client's property in jeopardy and cause big problems when you go to sell the property. So I just want to make sure that, you guys are very well aware. We also want to talk about appraisals. Appraisals are one of our biggest sticking points with ADUs. So I definitely want to make sure that you guys are very, knowledgeable there. And then we're going to get into how do you support your buyer, whether your buyer is looking for a property with good ADU potential, or they're looking for a property with an existing ADU. What are some of the things you really should be looking out for? And then what are some things we need to be looking for on the title report that are going to be important in the future, not just with ADUs, but pretty much with all multifamily properties going forward. And then correctly, when you're working with your seller, how do you support the seller? What are some things you should actually be noting on the MLS in your listing? How should you be pricing your ADU? That's a big question I get from realtors. How do I price this thing? Marketing the property with ADU potential. What are some things to potentially look out for with that? And then again, supporting the appraisal. That's going to be the biggest hurdle as a realtor to overcome, is making sure that you get that great offer, but making sure that the appraisal is actually going to support the value, or doing everything you can to assist with that. And then supporting your investor, helping your investor understand, is this going to pencil out? Does this project make sense, and how to compare different projects based on their ADU potential, determining the highest and best use for a property. And then we're going to talk about bootlegs and unpermitted units. What are the risks potentially for renting those out, and what are the steps to go ahead and get those permitted? And then costs and timeframes to get a unit permitted. A lot of people have some misconceptions about that. So want to cover that. And then rent control and permitted uses for ADUs. So we got a lot to cover. We got a lot to cover, but I want you guys to know this is what we're getting to. So if you have questions about any of these things, wait till we get to that section, and hopefully we'll get all of your questions answered. So first of all, let's just have a quick conversation about accessory dwelling unit versus junior accessory dwelling units. Came up a little bit in our last conversation, but really important for you to know. First of all, if your client's thinking about building one, or wanting the potential to build one, but also when you have a client purchasing a property that might have an ADU or a junior ADU, especially if there's something that you're going to see on title related to one of those. So here are some big differences between the two. A lot of people are going out, and a lot of builders are saying, hey, you can now turn your single family property into a triplex. What they're talking about is that you can, in some cases, you can add a detached ADU, and you can convert some of the existing space within the main house into a junior ADU, and essentially have potentially 3 units. But let's talk about what that junior ADU is, because you did not just create a triplex, okay? So for an ADU, it needs to have 4 things. We covered this on our last call: kitchen, bathroom, separate sleeping quarters, and separate entrance. For a junior ADU, it needs to have an efficiency kitchen with no gas appliances going into it, sleeping quarters, and it may share a bathroom with the main residence, or it may have its own. It does need to have a separate entrance, and it might also share a doorway into the main house. For an ADU can be attached, detached, garage conversion within an existing dwelling. We have a lot of options for where and how we can build an ADU. For a junior ADU, it must be within the footprint of the existing dwelling. Sometimes you can add up to 150 square feet specifically for ingress egress purposes only, but otherwise it has to be within the existing footprint. The ADU can potentially be up to 1,200 square feet based on state law, and at least 800 square feet. In local jurisdictions can we talked about this on the last meeting, but local jurisdictions can create maximum sizes, but in most jurisdictions, a homeowner should be able to build up to 800 square feet, regardless of lot size, lot coverage, open space, or floor area ratio requirements. But for a junior ADU, it can't exceed 500 square feet, just period. Okay. And then for ADUs, owner occupancy is not required, and that is statewide for the next 5 years. With a junior ADU, owner occupancy is required. And when I say owner occupancy is not required for the next 5 years, that is for permitting purposes. So once you permit the property to build the ADU, and you've owner occupied, in 5 years from now, if you want to move out of the property, or in 2 years or whatever, it's fine. It's already permitted. The project's complete. If your circumstances change and you're no longer owner occupying that property, that won't be a problem for the ADU. For the junior ADU, however, owner occupancy is required not just for permitting, but into perpetuity for the life of that property until you potentially have that junior ADU removed from title. So what that means is that a deed restriction will be recorded on title for that junior ADU. and it will affect future buyers and owners of the property. And some cities are even including verbiage on their deed restrictions that allows them to come in and inspect the property periodically to ensure that it's being owner occupied. So and it's so important. I feel like I'm so glad I've got a great realtor audience right now that I can share this information with you, because these are the things you should probably be cautioning and warning your clients about. Is builders are out there going, yeah, let's turn your property into a triplex. They're not thinking about the long-term ramifications. They're not thinking about what's going to happen when your client goes to sell the property. And this is why it's really important for you to be engaged in their ADU conversation, because whatever they do to that property is going to affect you someday when you're helping them sell the property. And you want to have enough information to be able to mitigate some of their concerns in the very beginning. Another thing that's important about this is, we recently were in the plan check process for an ADU where they did require a deed restriction. It's only an ADU, but they still wanted this documented, on title that it's an ADU, which I think is great. But when they wrote up the deed restriction, they wrote it up saying it was a junior ADU and that owner occupancy was required. Now, obviously, I looked over the whole entire verbiage that they had created. We caught it and we had them change it. But the typical design build company probably is not paying attention. They probably don't understand what the long-term ramifications are going to be of an ADU versus junior ADU. And they may very well just say, here, client, sign this and get it notarized so that we can continue with the permitting process. Not realizing that they just tied their client down to a definition of something that could impact the saleability of their property, that could impact how much they're able to sell that property for, and they just aren't very knowledgeable about that. So that's where you as realtor, just really important that you're involved in the process with the client, making sure that if they're wanting to do an ADU, that they're working with someone who's really knowledgeable, first of all, and that you can double check some of these things. When I do consultations, I have realtors actually who have referred clients, and then they come to the consultation as well with the clients, which I love. Typically, realtors who sit in on the consultations end up referring a lot more business my way because they see the value. But you're absolutely welcome to come sit through the consultation with your client so that you have the same information that I would be providing to them on their property. All right, so let's switch gears for a minute and talk about the difference between an ADU, a property with an ADU versus a duplex. They're not the same thing. And they should not be listed in the MLS as, if you have a property with an ADU, it should not be listed as a duplex. It's not a duplex. So let's understand the difference. From a homeowner's perspective, it seems the same, right? You've got 2 units. You can live in one, rent the other out. You can rent both of them out. So what's the big difference? Well, there are some differences that I think it's important for the realtor community to understand. So first of all, ADU units are not included in zoning density limits. So if you have a property that is limited to 2 units, and it already has a duplex, you can add units on. You could potentially add up to 3 units onto that property, depending on a number of things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So you can add those units, and it didn't change the density. The density still allows for 2 units, even though it now has 5 units. 3 of them are ADUs, and 2 of them count towards the density limits. Okay. So that's really, really huge. And that's why you can build an ADU on a single family property, because you didn't change the zoning density. For ADUs, there's a lot of leniency that has been provided by the state government code, which relaxes zoning requirements. It relaxes city zoning requirements to allow for more units to be built. And it allows for a lot of things that would not be allowed for a duplex. So sometimes we'll look at a property, let's say it's zoned R2, but there's a single family residence property on it. Based on some of the zoning requirements, it may have never been practical for someone to build that second unit, even though the density allows for a second unit. Maybe the setback requirements, the parking requirements, the floor area ratio requirements, for whatever reason, did not allow for that second unit to be built. So so sometimes on a property, people, even though they could put the second unit, they'll opt for the ADU because in practicality, that a second legitimate duplex unit is not going to work within the zoning requirements. And it's these more lenient requirements for something that we're labeling an ADU, which will cause someone to want to do the ADU versus the duplex, okay? Now, when we look at usage, ADUs are not permitted for use for short-term rental. And the big reason for that is because the state has created, you know, they passed all of these laws to force cities to be lenient on their zoning, because we're trying as a state to build 3.5 million new units of housing by the year 2025. And so this is a ploy to create more housing. It's not a ploy to create more Airbnb units. And so they're not permitted for short-term rental. A duplex, on the other hand, might. It depends on the city, right? It depends on the local jurisdiction rules. So maybe it will, but ADUs, it's codified in the state law that they're not to be used for short-term. They're not to be built for short-term rental. Now, what I have seen some homeowners do is move into the ADU and then rent rooms out in the main house or Airbnb, again, if it's allowed through their local jurisdiction. For ADU, additional parking is not required in most cases. And for a duplex, parking requirements pretty much always need to be met. And then when it comes to lending, most loan programs are not going to consider potential ADU income towards the income of a property. They're typically not going to take an income approach to valuing the property. And the potential income is not going to be typically added to an owner's debt to income ratio. There has been, I know of one beta test that's being done with about 3 or 4 homeowners through LA Moss. LA Moss has a pilot program. They actually have 10 homeowners, but I think 3 or 4 of those 10 are actually working with a local credit union. And they have allowed, for that pilot program only, they're just testing it right now, they have allowed for a percentage of the rental income to count towards the homeowner's debt to income ratio. So just so you know, there is some testing going on for that. But it's a very strict pilot. So you also are agreeing that you're going to rent to, you know, Section 8 tenant, and Section 8 tenants come with a certain set rent amount. So it's not necessarily market rent, it's what that Section 8 rent amount is. And that's what's giving the lender the certainty of what the rent will be. So they have a little bit more certainty than if they were just going off of a market rent, you know, analysis. So that's what lending looks like for ADUs. On the duplex side, the lending guidelines are going to depend on the property class. Is this a 2-plex? Is it an 8-plex? And so you know, and it's going to pretty much be standard lending for that. And the appraisal typically will consider an income approach, right? That will be one of the approaches they're looking at when they're valuing a property. Okay, so that's ADU versus duplex. Rita, I know we've got a lot to cover, but I just covered a lot. Are there questions related to what we just covered so far with ADU versus JADU or ADU versus duplex? Because this is it's kind of meaty, but it's going to affect what we talk about later in terms of buyers and sellers and how are we working with our clients.
Sure. We just have one quick question.
Okay.
What term is considered for short-term rental?
It's short-term rental is less than 30 days. So that's your Airbnb. As long as if it's at least month to month, then that's considered more of a long-term rental. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. So now we'll go on to the next one. So let's talk about some construction options for ADUs. So we have got let's see here. So a few things I want to talk about. I want to talk about your site built versus manufactured versus factory built, and as well as design build versus design bid build. What are the different approaches here? Cost, what's the process to build, and then choosing your team. So let's just talk for a second about site built versus manufactured versus factory built modular. So as we're talking about this, the site built is, of course, built on site. That's your, contractors come out, they build out the ADU. For prefab, for things built on the property, you basically have two options. We can do manufactured housing, or we can do factory built modular. So for manufactured, and they're different. People don't realize that there's a big difference here. So for manufactured housing, this is built to HUD standards. It's built to federal HUD standards. And factory built modular is built to California building code. They're both high quality construction. They're both probably better construction than the existing residence. But one of the big differences with the California building code is that we're more energy efficient. It's a more energy efficient building code. For someone who's really on a budget though, the manufactured might be the way to go, just because it is typically, it can be about 15 to 20% less expensive. So there could be some cost savings. So that person that's really on a budget, manufactured might be the way to go. I've been in a factory where there was a factory built modular being assembled right next to a manufactured. And for all intents and purposes, probably 85% of the structure is exactly the same. There is some differences with the foundation system. Predominantly, sometimes the thicknesses of walls, but the insulation that's installed, et cetera. But again, some of those can be, you could do manufactured and change some of the options if you wanted it to mirror some of the manufactured or the factory built options. But the product's gonna end up looking very similar. If it's built in a factory, a lot of times people think you have to go with a set floor plan. You don't have to go with the set floor plan. You can customize a floor plan. However, the cost then goes up. So typically people want to go a prefab route because they think it's going to save them time and it's going to save them money. The saving them money part might be true with manufactured. I have not seen it to be the case with the factory built modular. And the yeah, hold on one second. I'm gonna get rid of a barking dog. So sorry, Rita. Let's take this as a second to go ahead and put some comments in the comment field here. I'll be right back.
Elevator music, and put your questions into the comments. This is part of working from home, guys. I think we all have it. I've locked my dogs up so they don't dare bark today.
All right.
No worries. I'm sure mine will start when Amazon comes in an hour.
Yeah, she's gonna have a little play date with the dog in the backyard. So she's so sorry about that. I had put her out for a play date earlier, but I think somebody had let her in. So
no worries. I do have a few questions that came in real quick. So
perfect.
Is it more cost effective to build rather than using a manufactured? Will this less value price? Will there be a less value price for manufactured?
There should not be. I've talked to my lender about this. Fernando can also weigh in on this, but I've talked to my lender. She's gone really, really deep on the guidelines. And as long as the property is once it's installed on a permanent foundation, it's considered real property. Whether it's manufactured or factory built modular, it's considered real property. This is very different from park model manufactured homes that you might place in a manufactured home park. Those are built to different standards. They're governed. I think they're governed by the DMV. They're not governed by building department. So or excuse me, by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. So those park models are a different animal altogether. But in terms of placing a manufactured home that you're going to put on a permanent foundation on your lot, it will be considered real property, and it will appraise as, you know, a second unit on your property. And if if anyone's interested in going on a factory tour, you know, I can set up a factory tour and we can actually go and actually look and walk inside and see these units. They're, like I said, they're very customizable. Our building code is going to typically, most cities are going to require that the second unit that you add matches the main house. So if you have stucco on your main house, you're probably going to have a stucco finish on your ADU, and you can create a stucco finish, for example, on your manufactured home. So, you know, you can create a nice front porch. There's a lot of things that you can do. What I will say is it's typically not the most popular option, just because so in LA County, about a little over 80% of ADUs are either attached ADUs or they're garage conversions. So only 20% are new built, would even qualify for manufactured. They're more cost effective if you go with their models. As soon as you start wanting to change or modify beyond the scope of like their basic finish packages, more cost is incurred because they actually have to take the plans back to engineering. So you don't end up necessarily getting the cost savings there. So it depends. The other thing too, Rita, is we have to look at the property and see, is this property really conducive to placing a manufactured home? So part of the cost with a manufactured home is not just the cost of the unit itself, but it's also the getting the unit there, prepping the land and installing it. And if we don't have a way, if you're on a corner lot and we can just back it right in, that's one thing. But if we have to have a crane come in and place it, you know, that's maybe potentially, again, depending on the property, that could be an additional $10,000 added to your cost, right? So there's a lot of things that go into what's the more cost-effective way to go on a property. And that's typically, if somebody's interested in going the manufactured home route, that's something that I will typically advise on when I'm there at the property.
Perfect. And do you have specific companies for those prefabs that you work with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. So I actually have a manufactured home sales license. You can't just go to the factory and buy a manufactured home. You have to work through a builder dealer. So they basically, the manufacturers will, and I can, if people want, I can send a link to some ADU models. That might be a useful thing. Let me just make a note. Maybe I can put that on my realtors only page, is ADU models.
Perfect. And do newly built ADUs have the 10-year standard new construction warranty, just like any other new construction?
Yeah, I mean, if they definitely work with your contractor, but they should, yes. Yeah, it is. I mean, if you're doing new built construction, it's new built construction. The ADU laws don't change any of that.
Perfect. And then real quick, going back to the Section 8 question, do ADUs only cover Section 8 housing, or should they check with the cities that do cover them?
Yeah, so what I was referring to earlier about Section 8 was a very specific pilot program of like 10 property pilot program. And in that pilot program, to get that certain kind of lending, they did require that you have Section 8 tenants. ADUs in general do not necessarily require Section 8. So, it's up to you, the homeowner. Although I think something did change recently, and I'm not the expert on this, but I think something did change recently related to Section 8 and the requirement that some kind of I don't know if this was something that changed or was being proposed. Do you know anything about this, Rita?
There was a bill circulating. I'm not sure if it ended up passing, but there was a bill saying that they wanted to make certain areas with Section 8 kind of mandatory. So again, check with your local governments on that. I'm going to hold off on the rest of the questions for right now. Keep throwing them into the Q&A, and let's continue with this topic here.
Perfect. So we'll get back to the screen. Okay, so let's talk about design build versus design bid build. So basically what this is design build typically, and my company is design build, so I'll explain how we operate and then I'll explain what a design bid build is. what a design build is we come in as a team, and we typically bring in, like when I have an initial consultation with a client signs a design proposal with us, they want us to do the designs for their ADU, we will bring our contractor into that process at the very beginning appointment, because we really want the contractor's advice on how can we design this in such a way that is going to save the homeowner money based on their lot, and the idiosyncrasies of their property, their utility hookups, etc. Before we submit to the city for permitting, we have the contractor reviewed again to make sure, is there anything that we should be changing on here from a practicality standpoint and that could potentially save our client money. And then we put together, once the plans are finalized, we put together an estimated construction budget, and then we will sit down with the client and we go through that budget. There are often a lot of decisions that people can make along the way that will affect the cost of their unit. So there are some things that are just fixed cost that there's nothing we can do. They're required by code. We just have to do it. Then there's quality standards. So typically for your windows and doors, what quality level do you want? How long do you want them to last? How long are you going to own the property for? And so we make decisions that can affect the budget that way. And then we also look at your finishes. What finish packages do you want in your project? So there's a number of different routes we can go in terms of finishes. And that's where we have the most leeway and the most breadth at affecting the estimate. So we really work with the client to, come up with a really workable estimate that works for their budget and also for their goals. So that's the design build approach. And then when we get into the construction side, if the contractor has any questions about the designs, et cetera, there's already a very close working relationship between the designer and the contractor. We tend to work those issues out internally. When a design bid build approach, the way that works is someone has one company design it, and then they put it out to bid among contractors. Different contractors will bid on the project, and then you go with the contractor that you like the best. Now, some people like that because they feel like they can get multiple estimates, and I agree. I like getting multiple estimates on projects. I'd like to see what people are offering. Some of the things that you don't consider with, or that I think a lot of people don't consider with that approach is that, and we do. Sometimes we get someone who they've already created the plans and they want us to go to bid on a project. The problem is this project's already permitted now. And so as our contractors finding ways that we could have saved the client money, now it would be very, very costly to have them go back through the permitting process to make those changes. So now we just have to work with the plans as they are. And a lot of times, we always say, man, we could have done this for a better cost for our client had we been involved earlier in the process. So that's just kind of one of the challenges. We also will do a blended approach. If somebody has a contractor that they really love and they want to work with their contractor, fine. What we will typically do is say, okay, let's have your contractor come and be a part of our design process. Because I just feel it's very, very important that the contractor and designer are working together. I feel that that's the way that you save the most money on your project, rather than just sending it out to bid. The other thing with just sending your project out to bid, we just see this a lot in LA County, is that a lot of times contractors will want to be the lowest bidder. So they'll undercut all of the other bids so that they're the lowest bidder so that they can get the job, but then they change order the client to death after the fact because they know they can't really do the project for the estimate that they provided, but they know that they can make it up and change orders after the fact. And then it just really ends up being unfair to the client because they didn't get an opportunity, they didn't get an opportunity to make sure they had the funds to support that. I heard there was a realtor who sent me a client several months ago who had a garage conversion done and was quoted one amount. And by the time this project was completed, it had cost him 2.5 times what the initial estimate was. So not just 10% more, 2.5 times, and I don't even know what the struggles were that he went through to have to pull that extra money together that he didn't budget for. And then in addition to that specific project, come to find out the contractor, I don't know if it was a licensed contractor or not, evidently did not pull permits for this project and did not have it inspected, et cetera. So now it's not, now they can't get it it's not really a livable unit. It's not permitted. And there's huge liability now with trying to rent that out. So just all of that said, I think it's really important that you just work with somebody that you really trust. You can ask contractors to share with you, what were some estimates that they put together for other projects, so that you can get a feel for what things should typically cost. But ultimately, you just need to go with who you trust. But those are the different options for basically how you could go about, doing your project and how to work with a contractor. One thing I will say is a lot of people think that when they're working with that the first person to call is the contractor. And I'm going to show you in a minute why the contractor is not quite the first person that you call. And a good contractor can't just walk out to a job site and give you an estimate for how much a custom home is going to cost. And that's what this is. ADUs, even garage conversions. You're building a custom home. It has all of the components, the structural components of a new house. And so you really need somebody that understands new home construction, and anyone with that level of experience is not going to walk out and just give you a number on a project without seeing a set of plans. All right, so let's talk about cost to build an ADU. Everyone wants to know, what is it going to cost? What's the cost per square foot? And the cost per square foot is all over the map. It can be anywhere from $200 a square foot to $350 a square foot and on up from there. It truly is all over the map for what we're seeing. Part of the reason for that is because the most expensive square footage is in your first 400 square feet. And so it's really hard to give a cost per square foot on, a garage conversion compared to a 1,200 square foot unit. What I can say is that most garage conversions that are done by legitimate companies with new build construction experience are typically starting at between about $85,000 to $90,000, and that's your all-in cost. So that's you're getting your designs done, getting you through the planning process, and then doing the construction. The only caveat to that is that different cities have different plan check and permitting costs. So those are variables that can also play into what your total costs are that we don't really control. But that's your typical starting price for a garage conversion. For a new built unit, your typical starting cost is going to usually be between about $110,000 to $130,000. And obviously, the bigger the square footage of the unit, the more the cost will be. Now, some people, I get different views. Some people think, wow, that's really expensive. And other people think, wow, that's really inexpensive. So people's perceptions are all over the map in terms of the cost. But again, I always like to make sure people know if your mind is geared towards kitchen bath remodel, an ADU project is going to seem expensive. But again, there's a lot of structural components that are present with doing an ADU that are not in just a home renovation project where you're dealing in an existing dwelling structure that's already permitted for habitable use. So that's just a big thing to keep in mind. When you start looking at price per square foot, though, compared to your purchase price of a property, where you might be $500 a square foot, $800 per square foot in some of these areas, $200 to $350 a square foot in that range really ends up being quite affordable. Okay, let's talk about the process to build an ADU. And the reason this is important and why I really like for realtors to know, even though you're not necessarily going to be guiding someone through the whole entire process, I think you're oftentimes the first person educating the client. I think it's really important that the client understand that this is going to be a process. It's probably going to be a 9 to 12 month process, especially right now during COVID times. It has slowed some things down in terms of access to material from suppliers and the number of people that can be on a construction site at a time. So this is our typical process: is assembling your team, doing the feasibility on the property, understanding what you can build and where, and getting your financing in order. There are some people that just race out, want to hire a contractor. What the contractor is going to do is refer you to a designer. The designer is going to come out and take measurements and start designing away. And this actually happened to somebody that I had done a consultation for, and he had hired a different designer who came out and just put these plans together, submitted them to the city, and it turns out they couldn't build what they had wanted to build. Well, that designer didn't do their feasibility first. They didn't really do the preliminary steps to make sure that they could build what they thought they wanted to build on the property. So the feasibility is really important, and we cover a majority of that in our consultation. And the pieces that we don't cover, we can at least advise the client on next steps to ensure they've done their due diligence. And the better the planning in the beginning, the better you are prepared with your financing and understanding the feasibility of the property, the more successful the rest of the property will go, and the more you'll be able to anticipate what the costs are going to be, versus just rushing into a project and then uncovering unknown variables as you go along. That can be disastrous for somebody's budget. It may get them in over their head on a project. So it's just really important that you do these steps in order. Feasibility, we had a lady who, we had done a sewer scope on her sewer and determined that she was probably going to have to replace her sewer when she was going to tie into to her sewer line. And that was going to add money that really was going to throw her budget over. Because she was so tight on her budget, we really wanted to uncover as many unknowns as we could. And so, she ended up pulling out and saying, you know what, I can't do this right now. I need time to save more money. And so good thing that we did that in a feasibility stage versus having her under contract to do design plans, having her under contract to do a big construction project, and finding this out midway through when her property's all torn apart, right? So, better that we were able to pause early on, and it really gave her that peace of mind. So I just don't underestimate the feasibility part. Design plans should take about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how much time needs to go back and forth with the client. Once the plans, like the schematic drawings are finalized, then we need to go to engineering review and Title 24. That's typically a couple more weeks. And then at that point, we can put together a preliminary cost estimate. So a lot of times, when people want to just call you out to get an estimate on a project, I like for them to understand there's a lot that has to be done to actually get to the point of knowing what, getting a real number for what this thing will actually cost. And I can start with I can give people ballpark numbers, I can give them parameters, but to really understand for their project, there's these pieces have to be worked out first. Then plan check should take 60 days. Sometimes it's taking longer, especially during COVID time. So I just tell people, if you're going into this project, make sure you're a little flexible, because we're in uncertain times right now. Most planning departments are operable. You can't walk into any of the counters anymore, but most are operable and are receiving plans. There are a few municipalities that are not, but most are. And then after we have the plans actually approved, then we can put together final cost estimates. Sometimes the city will require things that we didn't have in our initial plans that now we need to go and add back in and provide a final cost estimate. And this is also where during the plan check time is usually when we'll work with a client in terms of talking about quality level and finishes and whatnot to really hone that budget, that estimate in and have it be really workable for the client. And then construction can be anywhere from 3 to 9 months, which is a huge span of time. But again, we're just dealing in a lot of uncertainty right now. Obviously, garage conversions are the quickest. We can usually do those in 3 to 6 months. I used to be able to say we could do them in 6 to 8 weeks. But unfortunately, we're not there right now in terms of, just with what's going on with the COVID situation. So it is what it is. Okay, so let's go on to the next. Let's talk about putting your winning team together.
Florentine, before we move into that, do you want to answer some questions in regards to like construction costs?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so one person asks, the 110K to 130K estimate that you mentioned, what does that estimate encompass and what is the square footage?
Yeah, so that's typically your starting cost for a new build ADU, right? So that's typically, your probably 400 to 600 square foot ADU. And that's kind of your starting point. And that should encompass your your design, all of your getting your plans, your engineering, your Title 24, taking it through the plan check process to the point where you're getting your permits, and then also the construction side of the project, getting the project built from A to Z, you know, with all of the finishes, etc. Typically, it's not going to include appliances, but it will include, you know, actually building it out and installing all of the finishes into the property.
Okay. And then does the cost of building an ADU unit more expensive in certain areas, for example, the coastal areas compared to other cities?
Yeah, you know, it's really property by property, and there can be things. So for example, if you're in a coastal overlay, there could be more costs involved with going through the permitting process. Different cities will have different requirements for ADUs. If we're building on a hillside, that will increase the cost. It could increase the cost considerably. If we're having to do grading work, depending on what type of soil are we having to do grading. If we're having to dig into a hillside and it's stone, right? The grading costs are going to be huge on that. If we have to build retaining wall on a lot to prevent you know, soil from moving in the direction of where the ADU is, that can be additional cost for a project. If we don't have enough slope, so sometimes, you know, a lot of times ADUs are the way back of the lot. If we don't have enough slope to get the sewer all the way down to the street, we might have to install a pump. That could be additional costs with the pump so that we're pumping the sewer up and out. Sometimes there's other workarounds. Maybe, you know, we do it on a raised foundation versus a slab. There's all kinds of strategies depending on the property. If it's a detached ADU, it will require solar, so that's an additional cost. So it really varies by property. Also, and we're going to look in a minute for what to look for your clients when you're looking for a property that's a good ADU candidate. And I'm going to show you some things to look for that will make it a good candidate and help keep those costs to a minimum. Because there's some projects, you know, I've consulted on some projects where it's like, okay, these guys have no idea about construction and they have no idea what all of the problems will be with this potential project that are going to have the cost be really high. So we'll definitely talk about that. What can you be looking for your buyers to help find a candidate, an ADU candidate property where, you know, you're going to be able to keep the cost down.
Sure. And then will property taxes go up if a client adds an ADU to the property?
Yeah, so and that was supposed to be a slide and it didn't get in. So let me make a quick note here. Yeah, so property taxes will increase by the value of the improvement, but the property itself will not be reassessed. So if somebody has, you know, owned their property for a very long time and has a really low tax basis, they get to keep the tax basis. They'll just pay for the improvement on the property. And if, let's say you convert a garage, they'll actually take away some of the value for the garage that you lost, and then they'll add value for the ADU that was added.
Okay, and then we'll go to one more question, and this is from Andrea, and I might need you to kind of rephrase your question, but she says, all of the info so far on ADUs, is it any different from a detached two-story ADU if SFR on property is a single level?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
As I said, Priya, if you could rephrase the question and throw it in there, we'll get to it.
Happy to answer that question, but I'm not exactly sure what the question is on that. So yeah, Andrea would be happy to come back to you on that and be able to answer your question.
Wonderful. So let's go ahead, go back into your slides.
Awesome. So we're going to talk for just a minute about putting together your winning ADU team. And the big thing about this that I like to tell people is, imagine that you're doing something you've never done before. Like, let's say, you know, you are tasked with putting together a winning NFL team, and your goal is to win the Super Bowl in your first year putting together a team, and you know nothing about, you know, putting together an NFL team. So my question would be, you want to win the Super Bowl this year, right? First time out the gate, you want to win the Super Bowl. Do you go out one by one and pick your players, right? Pick some good star players one by one and pull them together so you can win the Super Bowl this year? Or do you go out and pick a group of people who are already used to working as a team and have already demonstrated success working together as a team. And when I ask this in my classes that I do with homeowners, everybody says, what would you guess, Rita?
Well, I would guess that everybody's going to choose, we'll go pick a bunch of stars. But as a huge football fan, I would go with the latter there and get a team that's cohesive and can work together, because when you're bringing in different players, often they're not used to working together and you're not in that synchronicity that it takes to win.
Exactly. And actually most people do say, hey, just give me the team. Give me the team I already know can play well and work, because I've never done this before. They've at least done it before, right? I've never done this before. Let's just have the team come in that, kind of already knows what they're doing, and let them, make me look like a superstar. So, and the same is true when, we talk about how do you win with your ADU project? What are your goals? What is, these are conversations I like to have with the homeowner. What does winning look like to you? What does losing look like to you? How do we win together? But putting your winning team together. So these are all the people that you need to have on a team, and preferably have as many of these people as possible.
I hate to interrupt you, but we're not seeing your screen share.
Oh, you're not? Okay, let me make sure you're seeing my screen share. Thank you for the interruption. Happy to share with you because I want you to see what we've got going on here. All right. So my Zoom, for some reason, is not letting me click on. Hold on one second here. Okay, here's my share screen.
We're still not seeing it.
All right.
There we go.
It now? Okay, great.
Yes.
All right, I'm sharing the wrong screen though. Hold on. I'm going to share a better screen. We got a better screen for you. Oh, you know what? Darn it. Hold on one second. Let's go to a question, Rita, because my presentation disappeared, so I got to pull it back up.
Okay, here's a good one.
Okay.
What are the guidelines and costs for adding an ADU above a garage and leaving the garage intact?
That's a great question. And a lot of people want to do that because it's a big space saver. The costs are, what I will say is it's going to really depend on the property, but the costs are typically, going to be a lot more expensive. It's going to probably be at least $50 more per square foot to build above a garage. And the reason being, and in some cases we have to demolish the garage and rebuild the whole structure. So in some cases it can be twice as expensive as just converting the garage. The reason for that, the way I always like to explain it to people is that when you, if you're building on one level, if you have an existing garage, the structure is really just holding up a roof, right? So as long as we have good structure to hold up that roof, we're good. When we add a second level onto that garage, now the structure has to hold up a house, and there's a lot more weight bearing on that structure. And so in terms of your foundation, you may have to add shear wall to the perimeter. There's a lot of things that are going to be added cost when you add that second story. So it's for example, where I said a typical garage conversion could start at about $85,000 to $90,000, all costs in. I haven't seen an addition above a garage less than about $200,000. I mean, you can maybe get away with like 180, but the costs usually aren't, when you pencil it out in terms of of the rent that you're going to be making compared to what the cost will be, it doesn't usually pencil out. Now, if you really just want your property to be the way you want your property to be, and maybe you're going to have a family member live there, and you really don't care what the cost is, you just want what you want to preserve your yard space, and there's value to that as well. And I think, as realtors, you guys have a better sense of the cost trade-off, right? Like if someone wants to convert their garage and now they don't have the value of a garage, even though there's a new value of an ADU, they lost the value of having the garage. And in some areas of town, having a really nice landscape yard may be of value. The property value may be more than the extra living space value. So it's really a property by property basis, how you would make that determination. But most people, when we really get down to talking about, not only that, but most people's garage structures, they weren't built to be dwelling structures. They have to be retrofitted anyway. But so many homes were built decades ago. And so the condition and quality of construction a lot of times really is not gonna support it making financial sense to do that second story. Then there's also the issue of just things like setbacks. If your garage is like on the property line and you want to build an ADU above it, again, depending on the jurisdiction, but you're probably going to have to take that second level and move it in so that it's within the setbacks. If the garage is in front of the house, you may have restrictions about how high you can build within so many feet of the front yard setback. So there's a lot of, every property is different. And that's why we do these property consultations. It's really hard to play what ifs when every jurisdiction has very different rules for what you can and can't build.
Sure.
All right. So let me share my screen now. Okay, here we go. We're going to share this screen. There you go. Okay, so now you can see our winning team slide, right?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So the big thing I like people to know, again, when people say like, oh, I'm just going to call a contractor, the thing I like for people to know is there are a lot of people that are going to be working on this project, a lot of different team members. And so it's really important to know who are the team members that are going to be working on the project. And again, you know, Rita, I'm not just trying to sell people on, hey, you know, have Sidekick Homes come in and do everything for you, because like I say, we're flexible and we work with people. On some projects, we just do the design and we work with someone's contractor that they know and love and have a proven track record with. In other cases, we will get plans and we're just going in and doing the construction estimate. So we work at different ways. And in some cases, we just do the consultation and someone's not ready to move forward with a project. But we're flexible, but ultimately your winning team, this is who it should consist of. It should consist of somebody on that team who really is an ADU specialist and is going to be able to be an advocate, especially when you're going through the plan check process. That's really going to be the most critical thing that you need that ADU consultant for. Then there's your lender. It's also really important that you have a lender that understands the nuances of ADU. And you know, I'm sure that Fernando's got, you know, really great insights that he could provide. It looks like they do a class, but there are some really specific things to ADUs that your lender needs to be able to pay attention to, you know, one of which is the appraiser. And they're really going to need to work with a good realtor partner on that appraiser to make sure that, number one, they have an appraiser who is qualified to do an appraisal for an ADU. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But number two, a lender that understands, like for example, with construction loans, there's some funny little things like if you submit, when you're doing a construction loan, the contractor has to actually submit documentation to the lender at certain periods of time. Well, there are certain things that the city might require, but the lender doesn't allow, such as separate utilities, right? You might be required to have separate utilities to your ADU, but the lender's guidelines don't allow for you to have separate utilities for this loan program. Or separate address is another one. So you just have to be working with a lender who knows how to help guide the contractor in getting them the information they need without getting them information that they probably don't want to see. So, I mean, those are just some idiosyncrasies of making sure you've got a lender that understands ADUs. Then you've got your architect, designer, drafter who will put the plans together depending on what you're wanting to create and how specialized you want it to be. Will determine if you're needing to hire an architect, a designer, or just a drafter. You can save yourself a lot of money typically by going with a designer and or a drafter versus an architect, just because you know, architects, they have more schooling, they have more education, and they charge higher fees. But if you're not building an apartment building or a hospital or a school, a big glorious custom, custom designed fee, you don't necessarily need that. So for people who are going for cost savings, there's less expensive ways to get a really good quality unit done, and there are a lot of designers out there that have fantastic knowledge of designing in small spaces and have a lot of experience doing it. Then you've got your engineer who will do your structural plans, your Title 24, who will do all of the energy calculations to meet Title 24 building code. Then there's your permit processor. This is a really key person who has to know ADU law to advocate for you with the city. So, you know, and again, we mentioned this on the last presentation, but the cities, they have a lot. They have a lot that they have to know and keep track of. A lot of zoning laws, etc. So there's a lot that they have to keep track of. They're not always the most up to speed with ADUs. I don't know everything that these city planners have to keep track of, but I know ADUs. That's my one area of specialization, and it's what I train our team on. So we know ADUs. That's our thing. And so we really make sure that all of the wonderful laws that the state has put into place to overcome the hurdles of building an ADU, that allow the homeowner to build more, that allow the homeowner to save money, allow the homeowner to not have to pay development and impact fees. All of these wonderful allowances, the homeowner doesn't get to take advantage of them if the city planner isn't aware of them. And so that's really our role, is to come in and make sure that that they know that. Hold on, I have got a dog in my house again. So let me just message a housemate to let them know that the dog needs to stay outside. Hold on. Hold on here.
And just a reminder to everybody to just keep putting your questions and comments into the Q&A section, because we're not seeing those in the chat box.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So feel free to keep the questions coming. Okay. Then of course there's a general contractor. Very important that you've got a good general contractor. And then the one area that a lot of people don't look at, Rita, which I think is really important in the area of ADUs, is your specialty contractors. And the big reason for this, I say a good general contractor is only as good as their subcontractors. And the reason for that is because right now we have got a skilled labor shortage in LA County. We have got, as skilled tradespeople have been retiring, we haven't had enough new people coming into those trades. And then simultaneously, we have a lot of big commercial projects going on that are sucking up all of the talent. So, you know, we've got a $6 billion airport renovation going on. We have a $3 billion stadium being built. We have billions of dollars worth of infrastructure in terms of light rail systems being built. And then, you know, with the governor wanting to build 3.5 million units of new housing, we have apartment complexes going up. So it's very challenging to find that the really good skilled subcontractors, and for you to be a priority with getting them on your schedule. You know, there was a homeowner that I had talked to a couple months ago. We were sitting at her kitchen table, and she was talking about the nightmares that she had with a kitchen remodeler. And it was her mother who had dementia, and her two daughters who were in college, and they were all sharing a single bathroom in a house, and that bathroom was under construction for 6 months, which a bathroom remodel does not have to take 6 months. But it was because she was not the priority to that contractor, and that contractor probably didn't have good subs that were loyal to make her project a priority. So this is why it's just really important that, you know, as I've vetted contractors, and I probably talked to a good couple dozen contractors to get the team that I'm working with now. But, you know, one of the big questions that I'm always asking contractors is about the quality of their subcontractors. Who, you know, how long have they worked with their subs? How much work are they giving their subs? And are they really able to get those subcontractors out quickly and get them into their schedule to get projects done? Because for most people, time is money. You know, and if your project takes longer because, you know, we couldn't access subs to come on board, then that's costing you monthly rent that you could potentially be bringing in on this project. And then your financial planning, property management advisors. So also important that you have people that you're consulting with on that end as well, and who understand the ins and outs of ADUs. So that's your team. It's not just a general contractor. There's a lot of people that have their hands in this. And that's not even to mention the city planning, building and safety, public works departments that are also pretty involved. All right, so any questions before we go into financing options for ADUs?
Let's see if we have any specific for that. This person is saying, it sounds like a lot of work to get your proper estimates. What is a typical consulting fee we can expect expect when calling designers, contractors, etc., to scope out the ADU potential of a home?
Okay, awesome. So I can tell you what we do, and everybody does it a little bit differently. What we do as ADU specialists is we actually will come out and do a consultation. Our consultation is usually $300, but for realtors and for clients of realtors, we do it for $250. And that's a lot of the feasibility, a lot of the things that we talked about in the feasibility, in terms of determining what exactly you can build, where you can build, what are the things that will typically probably add to the cost of what you're building. That's really what that is. And so we do all of the research for the homeowner. We actually, we didn't talk about it on this slide, but we talked about a couple of weeks ago about how there are so many different government jurisdictions that have their hands in the ADU world. So a lot of times there's a number of different places we have to go to locate information about specifically what can be built on a property. So that's a lot of what we do. We do all of the research, we go on site, and then we also look at the property and we look for any potential things that we can see visually that may be a challenge. And then we really set the client up with the next steps. Are they ready to move on to the design phase? Do they have their financing in order? Do they need assistance with that? Do they, or are there some preliminary things? Do they need to do a site survey? Should they have their sewer scoped, right? Should we take a look at the title report? Are there questions about easements? So there's things like that we will advise on. And then I also will typically prepare rental comps for the area, and I will do a cost calculator to really help people tease out different options. So we can put rough numbers into a calculator that look at rough costs for different types of projects. Maybe they're considering a garage conversion versus expanding a garage versus, doing a new build project, and, a studio versus a 2-bedroom. So they may want to look at that. So we can put different scenarios down. We have, it has the financing, 30-year, 4%, however they want to tweak those numbers as well, so that we can really look at different scenarios and see what makes the most sense for that property. And that's part of our consultation is helping them figure out what the best use is for their property. Sometimes for some properties, a bigger, more bedroom unit actually will be a benefit. For some projects, when we do the numbers, the garage conversion actually ends up being the better way to go. Even though it's less rent per month, the cost to build makes that trade-off more beneficial in some cases. So we help the client tease that out for their property in their location. And then we also give them advice on this process to kind of help steer them down the path, whether they choose to go with us or with somebody else. I can't speak for other contractors and designers. I would just say make sure, especially on the design side, that you really are working with people that understand ADU law. A lot of people have experience doing ADUs, and they have experience doing it wrong for a long time. And I've come upon those people. I've come upon designers who've done a dozen ADUs or a couple dozen ADUs, and they're advising people wrong in ways that are going to end up costing that homeowner tens of thousands of dollars. And so just make sure that they're very, very knowledgeable about ADU law and are really able to advocate. One big thing that you might ask a designer, a way to vet a designer, would be to ask them what their process would be for determining what can be built on a property. Because most designers will tell you that they start by going to the city to ask the city what can be built on a property. And while that's an important step to take, while it's important to find out what the city's parameters are, a lot of times the city doesn't have, a lot of times they're not giving correct information. It's just the way it is. We have not yet gone through a process with a city where there wasn't something that we had to challenge on related to ADU. So that would be the big thing. I would just say, make sure that you have somebody that can demonstrate that they have more knowledge about ADUs probably than the local cities do.
Sure. And then if somebody wanted to book a consult with you, what is your schedule looking like? What would be the soonest availability?
We're usually booking about a week out. I'm a little backlogged at the moment because I've done so many presentations in the last couple of weeks. So everyone and their mom is calling us. So we're a little bit backlogged. And I'm in the process right now of bringing some additional, getting some additional consultations and project managers trained on ADUs. Up until now, it's been just me. So I'm getting some people trained. So we'll have more ADU experts to help people out. But I will say this, if you have a project that is in escrow, I always try to squeeze those into my schedule, because I understand you've got tight contingency periods. You know, time is of the essence. You don't have a lot of time to figure this out. So I will always, you know, stay up until 1 a.m. if I have to help take care of people that are in a big time crunch related to an ADU project.
Okay. And then does an ADU have to have its own address? If not, can they be labeled A or B or 1? And do they need their own utilities?
Great question. So in terms of address, it depends on the local city. Most cities do require for a separate address. And the big reason being, you know, obviously it's more convenient for the mail carrier, but the big reason being for safety, so that, you know, if there were to be a fire or an emergency, that the fire department or the EMT could easily locate that unit. So it usually will be required, but that's city by city. Same with the utilities. Now, I will say this, if the ADU is part of the existing home, if you're building an ADU out of existing square footage in the house, then you will not need additional utilities. If it's detached, it probably will. But again, it's up to the city. Some cities will actually allow you to tie into the main house's utilities. And typically with electrical, usually the electric company is only going to do one. They're only going to do one electrical drop, and then you'll have to, you know, sub-meter if you want to do separate utility bills, which is totally possible.
Okay, and then back to the parking requirements in terms of duplex.
Okay.
If a property is within a 1/4 mile from a public transportation hub, then there is no need for additional parking. However, if you convert a 3-car garage in that duplex into an ADU, do you have to have a 3-car garage put elsewhere, or are you within zoning rules because of the parking requirement being waived when you are a 1/4 mile away from a transportation hub?
Okay, so that's a loaded question. So I will say this. I will say, in the beginning I heard duplex, and then later we were talking ADUs. So again, their parking requirements for duplexes have not changed. So if there's parking required for the duplex, there's parking required for the duplex. Typically, if you're going to convert a garage to an ADU, whether it's a single family property or a multifamily property, you do not have to replace the parking. And it doesn't matter if it's within a 1/2 mile. The 1/2 mile has to do with adding additional parking. So that's, there typically is a parking requirement for ADUs, but if you're within a 1/2 mile of transit, which 95% of the properties we deal with are, then you don't need the additional parking. That's separate than if you're going to convert garage space. So, and that's, I think Nikki did take the whole entire conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago and put it on YouTube. So if you want to go back and check that out, we talked all about ADU law and zoning and all, we covered all of that in that conversation. So that'd be a really good one to go back and review.
Perfect. Yeah. Can an ADU be built up to 1,200 square feet as a 2-story ADU, even possible they're building up?
Possibly. It depends. It depends on the city. So some cities will allow you to build up to 1,200 square feet. Some are going to have a smaller maximum, might be about 850 square feet, right? So it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the property. It's going to depend on the jurisdiction. It's going to depend on the lot coverage, the floor area ratio, how close you are to the main residence, et cetera. So it's possible. It's possible to do 1,200 square foot multi-level, but it depends. It depends, and that's why we do these consultations, because and I can't. A lot of times people say, "Hey, Florentine, can you just drive by and check out this property for me?" And that's very similar, if you're as a listing agent, to someone just saying, "Hey, can you just like pop over to my house real quick and tell me what I can sell my house for?" It's like, well, even if you know an area really well, you want to look at your comps. You want to see what sold within the last few weeks, right? I mean, you want to look at the house. You want to see what the quality of the interior of that house is. It's really hard to just, pop over and tell someone what the value of their house is going to be or how much it's going to sell for. usually there's some research that you want to do before you go and you give your professional advice and you take that listing. And the same is absolutely true with ADUs. So I mean, we can spin scenarios all day, but most of the time I've got to actually dig in and do my research before I can really give professional advice on what can be done on a property.
Sure. So do you know if there's any sort of maximum square footage and bed bath counts that you're limited to for ADUs?
Again, it depends on the city. So every city gets to create their local ordinance. And again, I would advise people to go back and look at the presentation we did a couple weeks ago, where we covered that side of the information. But every city really gets to create their own laws around ADUs. They just have to meet state guidelines. So the state gives the local jurisdiction the capacity to create maximum ADU sizes. Up to a certain amount, though. You can't, that you have to allow people to build at least 850 square feet with zoning parameters, and at least 800 square feet, outside of things like lot coverage, floor area ratio, et cetera. Again, I think we went into a lot of detail. It's complex, and we spent a lot of time explaining that on the last webinar. I don't want to take us too far off track, because I want to make sure we're able to give today's information today. But I would say definitely go back and listen to the explanation of that from the last one. But it depends. It depends on the jurisdiction. They do get to create their own rules for square footage. One thing I will say in terms of minimum size per bedroom count, that question may have come from somebody in the city of Torrance, because when Torrance initially put out their ordinance, they did have minimum size per bedroom, which I felt like really made it challenging for someone to I think it was like 700, like a one bedroom had to be a minimum 750 square feet or something. It made it challenging and cost prohibitive, I think, for a lot of people to build what they wanted to be able to build. And so we were actually instrumental in bringing that to the attention of an attorney, just to say, hey, is this legitimate? Does this meet the state standards? And the attorney had a conversation with the city attorney at Torrance, and actually got that removed from their ADU ordinance. So if you're looking at an old copy of Torrance's ordinance that's not just within the last couple of months, there may be minimum size requirements per bedroom count, and that's no longer a part of their ordinance. It's been removed. So I'll just mention that real quick.
Let's get back to the slides. Let's get into our financing. Continue to throw your questions in there, and then we'll take another break for Q&A.
And these are great questions, by the way. And even the questions that I can't answer because they're really property specific, Rita, they're great questions. And I love how everyone's minds are churning and thinking. And what I'm hearing is people are really trying to create opportunities for themselves and their clients, which is exciting. And that's really the whole point of this. Is you're not going to memorize all of this information, I guarantee it, but having these ideas and starting to see, hey, what's possible, what's doable, what can we make happen, I think is really valuable for people. All right, so let's talk about financing for a second. We're going to talk about conventional financing, and then we're going to talk about alternative financing. And most of what we're going to talk about for alternative financing is going to be more buyer beware or realtor beware, and be having conversations with your client about financing when they're wanting to do an ADU project, so that they don't get themselves into a problem. So first, we're going to talk about what are the legitimate ways to finance an ADU. And these are the things that Fernando will be able to help you with at Homebridge Financial, right? He will be able to help you with a cash out refinance. He will be able to help you with a renovation loan, maybe a home equity line of credit. I don't know if we're doing those right now. But these are your predominant ways that you're going to get a loan, and it's against the equity of your house. Other more traditional ways of financing are things like money from savings, borrowing from a retirement account or an insurance policy, loan from a family member, taking some of the money out on a credit card, probably really high interest. I don't know if I would advise that, but there's options that people use, and sometimes people use a mix of options to get their project done. And so again, we spoke a little bit about this. Really important to just work with a lender who understands ADUs, who works with ADUs, who can help you kind of avoid some of the pitfalls with ADUs. And then also another thing I would be asking the lender is, do you have somebody, we're going to talk about this in a minute when it comes to appraisals, but do you have somebody on your panel who is on your appraisal panel who's ADU qualified? the Appraisal Institute has very, very, very recently finally created a specialist class for people for appraisers on valuing properties with ADUs. And I've been pushing this for a couple of years now, and finally I got to. I don't know if it's available, to everyone. I know they taught a beta test of it, and I've actually got to review the curriculum for it. So I'm very, very excited. That's a huge step forward. And now what's going to be important is that lenders they don't get to pick the appraiser, but they need to have people on their appraisal panel who've taken the class, and who have a really solid understanding of how to value properties with ADUs. So that's that. Now, alternative financing. I like to make sure that realtors are aware of this, because your clients are going to be sold on some of these forms of financing, and it's going to be important that you are that voice of reason to be able to help people determine what is the best way to get their project financed. And typically people who are the most challenged at accessing conventional financing are also going to be the ones that will be more prone to be taken advantage of. Let's see here. So let's look at some of these alternatives. And again, these aren't all bad. They're not all bad, but we just need to we need to understand what these are for. So there's the private money route. There are private money lenders who will loan for ADUs. Hard money typically comes at a very high interest rate. It's typically twice what you would get through your lender, but it is available. There's crowdfunding. I've seen people crowdfund their ADU, which is an interesting concept. I don't know how successful you'd be at, raising $100 grand from your family and friends, but it's a possibility. Maybe if you decided to share the rent with them, they would go for that. There's companies that will develop and manage. So there's a company called United Dwellings. They're actually a pretty reputable company. So what they do, they're trying to make it affordable for people who cannot get financing for their ADUs. So basically what they do is they will they basically have my understanding is they have a land lease with the client. They will place an ADU. I think they were doing garage conversions, and now they're placing prefab units. They will place the ADU, and they will rent share. So instead of, maybe you could have gotten $1,200 a month or $1,500 or $1,800 a month for your ADU rental. Now maybe you'll get $400 or $500 a month, and they'll take the rest. And then after, I don't know, so many years, then you can own the ADU outright, or you can purchase it from them. So and they do seem to be reputable. I haven't heard anything bad about United Dwelling. It wouldn't be my first choice though, if you could afford the financing, because you would be able to pay it off much quicker, and you would also be able to have more rental income coming in quicker. But for somebody who cannot afford to get the project done, this is a way to have some additional income coming in. The big one you want to really, really look out for is the PACE program. And huge red flags around this. I know realtors, you already have experience working with PACE when it comes to solar. Well, here's what's going on. There actually are no PACE programs for ADUs. That's the first thing that you have to do. There are no PACE programs for ADUs. What's happening though is that the PACE salespeople, and it goes by different names. So there's PACE, Hero, Benji. These are all forms of PACE loans. What is happening is the salespeople for these loans are reaching out to contractors that build ADUs, and they're saying, hey, contractors, we can help your people get financed so that you can get underway with your construction. And guess what? They won't have to pay any payments for 18 months. Doesn't that sound great? And it's really easy to get them approved. Here's the problem. PACE loans are only for energy efficient upgrades. So what that contractor ends up having to do is take their budget to build a whole house, and they have to balloon the costs that are going to be for energy efficient features like your windows, your doors, your insulation, etc. They have to balloon those costs so that they take up the whole budget of what it's going to cost to build the ADU. Then in order for them to get paid, which most contractors, they're not going to wait until they've built a whole project to get paid. They need money, to cover their costs of materials and paying their guys, etc. So what they do is they have to get, but these PACE programs don't pay out until a homeowner calls on the phone and says that my project has been completed. So the contractor is coached by the salesperson, the loan salesperson, to get the homeowner on the phone and call the loan program and say, yes, indeed, my project has been finished, when the project has not probably even started, so that the funds can get dispersed for the project. The problem with this, and there have been actual cases of this, is the contractor skips town, there's no accountability, right? The contractor skips town with the client's money, the client doesn't have an ADU built, they're on the hook for this money. That's your worst case scenario. So very, 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 in my mind, it's a pretty risky loan program. The other big challenge is they say, oh, no payments for 18 months. Here's why there's no payment for 18 months, because you all know how property tax assessments happen, right? So they're not going to be assessed. It's going to take a period of time before they're assessed and the payment becomes due. But that project, that now, let's say it's a $100,000 ADU project, gets tacked onto the client's property taxes. So now when they, 18 months later, get slapped with a huge property tax bill, they just have to pay this huge chunk of money for their annual property taxes that they probably haven't been saving up for. So in my mind, it's a huge, and so now you've got a homeowner that's at risk of losing their property because they can't pay. However, I don't know how big that property tax bill would be, you know, $8,000, $10,000 for the additional for that ADU. It could be a tremendous amount of money. So huge red flags in terms, if you hear a client talking about getting a PACE loan for a construction project, you definitely need to have your ears open for that, and you need to talk to your client and counsel them, because it can create huge problems. Not only that, but now when you go to sell the property, you know that that's now on title, and it's going to likely have to get paid off with close of escrow. There's just a number of issues with it. I have a feeling it's going to be outlawed eventually, because it's such a huge risk to homeowners. So definitely, please, and it's more mainstream than you think. So, you know, please watch out for that. And not only that, but I've penciled it out. The interest rates are so high on those. They're similar to like a hard money loan. They're typically like 8 to 10% interest. So by the time a homeowner is paying that much interest, they're not really getting the rental returns that they otherwise would be getting either. So just, you know, I always tell people, try to go the conventional route with your loan. It's so much safer. And then there's equity share companies. These are just a few of the companies out there. You got to really read the fine print with the equity share. I've seen it as bad as they'll pay up front for you to build that ADU, but then when you someday go to sell the property, they want 90% of the increase in however much of equity your property increases by. So they'll say, let's say the base value of a property right now is $800,000, and then you go to sell it 10, 15, 20 years later for $3 million, they're going to take 90% of that growth in equity. So again, I feel like it's really big risk. Read all the fine print. If something looks too good to be true, it probably is. So just keep your eyes out, read the fine print, and make sure that you really understand some of these alternative loan products, because they're not giveaways. They're not money giveaways. There's strings attached, and you need to know about them. And then for nonprofit, I put this, LA Moss is a nonprofit that I referred to earlier, fantastic organization. They've received grants actually from the city and the county to do a few different ADU pilots. The most recent one had 10 homeowners in it. There were, from what I heard, there were several thousand people that had applied for this pilot, and 10 got in, and they helped with some of the initial, help mitigate some of the initial design costs. So great organization, but limited capacity, right? So the majority of people didn't get to participate in the program. So it's not necessarily something that's open to everyone and very mainstream right now. And I think of those 10 people, again, there were only like 3 or 4 people that got to participate in the loan program with the credit union. So those are just, again, some alternative things to look out for, but just have conversation with your clients if they're wanting to do an ADU. Financing is really big. Have them talk to your lender. If you have a really good lender that you trust, have them talk to your lender. Or we've got lenders that we can, that we can share, but make sure that they're in really good hands with the financing. All right, Rita, any questions about financing?
I am not seeing any about financing.
Okay. Okay, cool. Good, good, good. All right. So let's just talk about, let's get into supporting your buyer, supporting your seller, and working with investor clients. So first of all, let's talk about what to look for in terms of a property that has good ADU potential. So these are some of the things that when we're talking about how do we mitigate cost on a project, these are some of the things that you want to look at. One of the big things to look at is, if you imagine we have to equivalent of like build a house in somebody's backyard. That means that we have to get big equipment back there. We have to have big trucks that are going to drop off a lot of, building materials. So we need a place for big trucks to access the building site. So corner lots are fantastic. Properties with alleys are really great, or at least if there's a big driveway that we can drive down the street. If it's a property that doesn't have any of those, just know that the cost will probably be more expensive. If all there is like a 4-foot wide walkway on either side of the property and we have to haul everything back by hand, it's going to be more man labor hours to do that project, right? Flat buildable lots. This is really important. One of the first consultations I ever went on was with a homeowner who wanted to build, actually, it wasn't a homeowner. It was a buyer of a property. So see, this is why I want to tell you guys this before you get somebody into escrow. I want you to already be pre-vetting these properties before you have me come out. So this property was up on a hill unto itself. So you had to go up a really steep hill to get to the house, and then up another steep hill to get to this nice flat area where they wanted to build the ADU. The thing is, there was no driveway. There was only a really steep stairwell that went up to the house, and then a really steep grassy patch that went up to the back. So can you imagine how we're going to get materials back there? Can you imagine when we're grading that soil, how we're going to get the soil back down this really, really steep hill? So I was just looking at this and I just thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be a nightmare. There's no way to truck anything in. Everything's going up and down really, really steep hills. Well, that wasn't the most of it. Then on the back and he wanted to build a 2-story ADU. Well, the back of the lot's just a sheer cliff, just a sheer drop, and there's no retaining wall. And there's a whole nother property, 20 feet below a little apartment complex. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the structural engineer is going to have a heyday with this, because you're probably going to put the weight of a 2-story structure on this plot of land where there's no retaining wall on the backside of this hill. So the cost, we couldn't even ballpark an estimate for the cost. I mean, you're going to have to have plans drawn up. It's going to have to go to the structural engineer. You're going to have a ton of soils reports that are going to be related to this project. The city's going to want to see a ton of different things. Like, just the cost to be able to get it permitted alone, I can't even tell you what those costs would be. It was, and then to build it out. And I want you guys to be paying attention to these things so that you're not finding a client that property and then having me come out and try to tell them what they can do in terms of ADU, because it's not going to be a very pretty report. And I want to help you get your property sold. I don't want to help you back out of escrow. I want to help you get your property sold. So that's why I'm giving you these insights up front so that you can be on the lookout for these things. And then obviously detached garages that are in good structural condition are great. If a house is easily dividable, if you can walk the floor plan and go, wow, I could really see how we could divide and create a separate unit. Sometimes the tall and skinnies can be fun. It's in some of the beach cities, you can have an upstairs unit, downstairs unit. So there's ways to actually divide and create 2 units that way. Obviously higher rent areas can be good, but not even that. There was a project, where were we? I want to say we were in, I think, East LA somewhere, and there was a property that I was blown away by how much cash flow we were able to create. We were just doing an ADU and a junior ADU, but there was already so much good structure and good bones that already existed that there wasn't going to be a lot of work we were going to actually have to do. So the return on the investment was going to be incredible. So even areas that aren't necessarily highest rents, but the potential to build is really good. I think is something to look at. And then just thinking about the lot and how would you lay it out, and is there enough space to create privacy? That's a big thing that people want. Or if they're looking to have it for family purposes, they want to have some multi-generational living. How would you use the communal space? That's really important to look at. And then coastal overlay zones are always going to add a layer of complexity. So if you're looking to buy a property with intention of building an ADU, you know, I'm not saying don't do it. We are doing a project in San Pedro area, so that's one that will be getting underway here soon. So we'll do coastal overlay, and it's totally possible. But it's well, I'll say it's possible for some lots. I'm not going to say it's possible for every lot, but there will be an extra layer of requirements that we will have to go through for coastal. So these are just some things to look at. Also, hillside, you know, properties on hillsides may have additional requirements and additional costs. Properties in high fire hazard zones, you might not be able to build on them. They cannot be out. Torrance, I know, used to, like, as of last year, you couldn't have an ADU. You couldn't build a new ADU in a hillside overlay, whereas now you can. So that changed as of January. So there have been some changes in terms of being able to build on hillside, but sometimes there are more restrictions around what can be built and where can be built when it comes to hillside and high fire hazard. So a few things just to keep in mind there. Now, what to look out for if you're looking at a property that has an existing ADU? What should you look out for? Definitely always look out for, is this unit permitted? And you also want to determine, is it permitted as an ADU? Is this a duplex? It's gonna really impact your lending. There was I got a call from a lender last year who was in a big pinch because a property had been listed as a duplex. The client had purchased it as a duplex. Once they got the title report back, they realized it was not a duplex. They got their certificate of occupancy back for the property. It was not a duplex. And so they ended up, because they had just newly built it. It was an ADU. They had already done the appraisal. They had to redo the appraisal because a property with an ADU does not appraise the same as a duplex does. So it's really important, as there are more and more ADUs, whether you have a client who's looking for an ADU or a client that's looking for a duplex, it's going to be really important as a realtor that you're sorting that out, that you're doing your research and understanding what this property really is, because it will affect the lending on it and the appraisal. So really big to look out for. Some other things to look out for with existing ADUs. So is it permitted? Is it not permitted? Is a big one. Is it ADU or duplex is another really big one. And then you also want to look at the quality of that ADU, especially when you're helping put together comps for the appraiser, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Really important that you're looking at the quality level of that ADU. A lot of times when properties are being flipped, they're not putting in the highest quality windows, doors, flooring, finishes, etc. And it's going to a lot of things are going to need to be replaced in a short period of time. So it's just important that you have an idea of, was it built to quality construction standards, or does it look like it was made pretty cheaply? And a lot of times for flips, it's the lipstick on a pig. They want, typically flippers are wanting it to look nice and not necessarily having it built to last a really long time. So just, be on the lookout for the quality level. Now, if it's an unpermitted unit, we're going to be talking in a minute about how to get a property unpermitted. But if it's an unpermitted unit, be careful with that as well. It should not be treated the same as a permitted ADU. And so there's some things that we want to really look at when we're talking about unpermitted, when we're talking about these unpermitted units. So that's coming up. We'll get there in just a minute. And then always checking the title report. So you definitely want to find out if there's an additional unit. Is it an ADU or is it a junior ADU? Are there owner occupancy requirements that are tied to that title? Is there something on the title that says that it can't be used for Airbnb purposes? And if you know that that's how a client wants to use their property, you need to make sure that you are paying attention to those things that'll be on title that might be different than what you're normally used to looking at on a title report. Okay. Before we talk about supporting your seller, Rita, do we have questions at all thus far on supporting the buyer?
No, nothing specific to that. Let's keep
Okay.
going because I'm being conscious of the time here, and we'll
Perfect.
get to these questions towards the end.
Perfect. I love it. I know we've got 15 minutes left and still some value I want to be able to give you guys. I'm giving you everything today. I probably should write a book. You know, I think we've got about a book's worth of information here today.
Either that or like a weeks-long masterclass course.
I know. Well, you know, and it's funny, people always say 2 hours, that's a lot of time. I'm like, you have no idea how much information there is to soak up. All right, so let's talk about supporting your sellers. So first of all, correctly listing on the MLS. Again, if you have a single family residence with an ADU, it should be listed as a single family residence. It should not be listed as a duplex because it's not a duplex, and that would be misleading. What we should be doing, though, as realtors, I would reach out to our South Bay board. Nikki can tell us the appropriate committee to talk to, but I know there's a committee that actually works and gives suggestions to the MLS, and I think it would be smart to have where we're listing the property types to have single family resident with ADU, multifamily with ADU.
I'm actually on that committee, the MLS committee. So we
Yay, Rita! Rita, let's talk. Let's make this happen. We so need that. We so need that. Because currently, really the only way to locate properties is to do a word search, right? To see if it's in the descriptive paragraph and somewhere it says ADU, but then you're going to be pulling up all the properties that have ADU potential or unpermitted ADU, and it's not the same. So we need an actual category that makes it easy for realtors to search. Here's another tip. It not only makes it easier for realtors to search, but if we did that, it would make it easier for appraisers to locate comps, which would help appraisers support the value of these properties. So that's really the bigger reason why we need it. I've spent time up in Portland, Oregon, where they've been doing ADUs up there for about a decade longer than we have here, and their MLS actually has that as a property type. So so they're doing it up there. We should get on that bandwagon too. There is most people aren't aware, but there is an ADU disclosure in the MLS. There is a box that you can click to actually include an ADU disclosure, an ADU attachment to the listing. So I recommend that, but again, because most realtors aren't really educated about that, most people aren't going to be searching by that criteria. But it is one thing that you can do, again, that will help. If nothing else, it will help our appraisers. And then how to price a property with an ADU. The big thing that you're going to have to look at, and I know it's challenging, but you are going to have to look at comparable properties. And you need to do this not only for pricing the property correctly, but for supporting the appraisal, because that's going to be the biggest way that you're going to really be providing value to this client is by working with that appraiser to get the value. So you have got to go find these comps. Now, one thing that I will tell you is being taught to appraisers who are taking the class is that they have to, when they're appraising a property, again, this is only people who are qualified appraisers who've taken the specialty class. This is not all appraisers. So you got to get one of these qualified appraisers. But what they're being taught in this specialty class is that if you cannot find comps within your geographical area and going back just your 90 days or however far back you're going, that what you need to do is you need to go further back in time or you need to go further out in terms of the proximity from that property. And they're being told that the first thing they should do is go back in time. They should first go back in time to try to find that comp. And they have to find a comp that matches this property. So they have to look at the size of the ADU. They have to look at the quality level of the construction of the ADU, the finishes of the ADU. They're supposed to be taking all of this into account to find at least one comparable property. You need to go find at least 3, but the appraiser is being told that they need to find at least one comparable property with an ADU. So just so you know, you might have to go further back in time. So they're first told go further back in time and then adjust for how the market values have changed over time. If they are not able to find an adequate comp that way, then they're being told to expand the geography and then do an adjustment for, this market over here being a little bit different than this market that we pulled the comp from. So you as a realtor chances are what I just told you just now is probably more than what most appraisers are going to do. You absolutely have got to be prepared with good comps that really show the value of ADUs. If you are not prepared, the appraisals are all over the map. They're using all different criteria, and I've seen it as bad, Rita, as an ADU getting a zero value. Like not even extra square footage, like getting zero value because the appraiser couldn't find another comp of a property that had an ADU. So just, you have got to be the advocate for your client and really, really demonstrate the value for them. So there's that. And then I would also keep all your receipts for your ADU. Keep all the receipts that relate to the value of building that ADU, so that when it comes time, that may be something else to be able to provide to the appraiser so that they can see what it actually costs to build this ADU. I don't know if they'll take that into consideration or not, but why not have that, as additional ammunition? So keep all of your project receipts. All right, let's talk about marketing a property with ADU potential. We'll make this really quick. Here's the best thing you can do. Have me come out and do a property report for you so that you can just provide that to buyers. You can say the ADU expert said you can build an ADU on this property. Here's the report. And that way you don't have to be responsible for saying it has ADU potential. You can put that in the hands of the ADU expert. We'll come out and do that for you. One of the big things that we like to do, in addition to just looking at what and where you can build on a multifamily property, I will actually run numbers. So we'll be able to say, okay, here's what the cap rate is on the property as it is. If you were to add the ADU, plug in this cost, plug in what the new rents will be, take out the expenses, et cetera. We can run two really good side-by-side comparisons and say, well, here's what your new cap would be after you add the ADU. So it really shows for that multifamily property, in addition to just what and where can you build, it really shows, wow, I can really improve this property has a potential for me to go in and improve the performance of it and then potentially resell at a higher value. So that's the value that I can offer you. Again, I do $250 for realtors. So happy to do that for you for those ones that have ADU potential. I'm actually also happy to help with providing, as long as I have enough notice, providing flyers and whatnot for open houses that let people know. And you can have that report sitting right out there, and they can contact me with any questions they have about ADU, just so you don't have to be the responsible party for that. And then we already talked about supporting the appraisal and what you really need to do to make sure that the appraisal is fully supported there. Okay, now let's talk about supporting the investor. The big thing with investors is they want to know what's going to pencil out. That's the big thing for them. They want to see what their returns are going to be. And so one of the biggest things that I will do is just what I just told you, looking at a multifamily property and saying, here's how it's currently performing. If you added an ADU, this would be the difference in how it would perform. And so that's one way that we can do is that comparison. The other thing we do is look at the highest and best use of a property. And this is something that we had talked about. We had talked about this on our last call about how we were able to take a single family property that was on an R2 lot and basically turn it into 5 units as like the maximum amount for that property that we could build. And that was a client who was hoping to build an ADU, junior ADU on the lot. So that's another way that I really support investors, is being able to help them understand how they can maximize what can be built on a property. And for those parameters, if you want to, have a little knowledge base to get your investors going, I would say look back at the presentation we did a couple of weeks ago, because it really does a really good job of providing that highest and best use, or demonstrating that scenario for how you can get that highest and best use, and how to look at the zoning and the property mix and what can be built on a property. All right, so I'm running against the clock. We've got about 5 minutes here, but I want to make sure that this is going to be one of our last topic areas. Really important to talk about bootlegs and unpermitted units. The risks, I'm just going to tell you what I'm seeing out there in terms of risks. First of all, there are people I have actually uncovered. There are people that are actually doing this as a way of providing housing for themselves, where they will move into a property that they have a sense is probably unpermitted. pay rent for a couple months, stop paying rent, turn the homeowner in to the building department. So now the building department comes out, homeowner gets a violation and fees that they have to pay, and they're told that they have to convert that garage that was unpermitted back to its original use. Now the homeowner is forced to do a no-fault eviction to get this tenant out so that they can convert it back. And now that it's discovered that it's the property is unpermitted, they don't have a right to be charging that tenant rent. And so now all of a sudden the tenant's not paying rent, they're being evicted, they get a nice long 6-month eviction process, and they get paid to relocate at the end of it all. They're, I don't know, $15,000, $18,000 to relocate. So it can be a huge financial risk, but it can also be you also could potentially face criminal charges. If something should happen, if that unit should burn down and somebody should die in a fire, God forbid, you could potentially be facing manslaughter charges for renting out a space that should not have been rented as habitable space. So there's big risk in renting unpermitted units. The process to get a unit permitted, we have to draw up plans, we have to submit it to the city will send out an inspector who will tell us what we need to do to bring that unit up to current building code. And then the unit will have to be brought to the current building code. So it's not a quick thing that you do. You don't run down and get a permit before you sell a property, because it will take too much time, unless you're not planning on listing until next year. So the way to help your client sell this property is to, again, have a report. We just did one last week for a realtor in, I think the property was in Hermosa Beach. We went in and we put together, they had an unpermitted unit. We put together the report. Here's what you can do on the property. Here's the process to get an unpermitted space permitted. She can disclose that to future buyers. And they see that there's a path forward. They see that this is a great candidate for getting permitted. But her client isn't having to pay the cost up front or take the time to do it. The costs, people think this is going to be cheap. It's a couple $1,000s. You're probably looking at a good $40, $50 minimum by the time you do all the retrofits that it's going to take to have that unit be a livable unit. I can work out for people how it makes sense in terms of the return, but it will cost money to do it. So if you have a client out and you're looking at bootleg units saying, oh, hey, you can just permit it after you purchase it, make sure they've got the funds to do that. It could, and on the high end of the scale, it may be that the property isn't even salvageable and the whole thing has to be torn down and rebuilt is the most cost-effective thing to do. So be really careful about selling people these unpermitted units who don't necessarily have the financial resources available. And the other thing with these unpermitted units is a lot of times, they're the hardest to predict what the cost will be. They're the hardest to go in and say what it's going to cost. We have to start taking things apart before we can understand what's going to have to be replaced. And we have to spend money and get underway with the city before we can even determine what they're going to want us to change. So it can end up being a bit of a rabbit hole, and a buyer just really needs to be ready. A buyer really needs to be ready for that. So that's that on bootlegs and unpermitted. Rent control, I will say, talk to me about, we're pretty much out of time. So if someone has a rent control question, I'm happy to answer it. And then just in terms of permitted use, just making sure that we know that short-term rental is usually not permitted for an ADU. So that's, bam, we got it. We got it done, but we got it done before our time limit. There's one more thing though, Rita, if you don't mind, that I want to help. Everyone says, I want these slides. I want all this information. Let me show you where you can get all of this information, because I've got.
And your contact information too, please. We got a couple questions asking about that.
Okay.
We're going to try to do a lightning speed round
of Q&A?
Questions of Q&A.
Perfect.
I will make a little disclosure here. I see a lot of questions about 1 to 4 units, duplexes, 2 units, the guidelines, all of that. Please, Nikki's going to throw it up into the chat box. Go to our YouTube channel and you could watch Florentine's first class that she did with us 2 weeks ago, where she delves into that in full detail.
Perfect.
One quick question, and I know you answered this on the last one, but just quickly, will the title report specifically say ADU or JADU?
If there was a deed restriction that was required to be filed against the title, yes, it should. The local cities are the ones who are typically writing up these deed restrictions for the homeowner to then go file with the county recorder's office. So it depends on how they write it up, but it should specify ADU versus JADU. And then some cities may not require that an ADU actually be recorded on title. So there's a possibility that someone will have an ADU and it's not recorded that way on title. So, okay. Yeah.
And then quickly, does the ADU units, do they fall under rent control or rent control in certain areas?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the rent control law. One of the big things I was going to just say about City of LA specifically, if you have let's just take a scenario, you have a 1920s home, single family, it's not covered under rent control, right? You add an ADU. Now the property qualifies for rent control, okay? Because now you have more than one unit, you have 2 units. The ADU isn't under rent control though, right? Because it was just built in 2020. The single family home though, if you want to rent it out, now it will fall under rent control. So it's really quirky and complicated. But that's how LA is doing it. And you know, we know every city is a little bit different. I know we also now have state and county rent control as well.
Okay. Is it possible to have a permitted rec room permitted as an ADU?
It is possible, but I would have to really see the property to see if that was something that could be done. But it probably is space that could be converted.
And then, and I think this is incorrect, but somebody said, is it true that you cannot use an ADU for income property?
That is incorrect. You can use an ADU for income property.
It's just short-term rentals that we're talking about.
Correct. You can't do Airbnb, but you can totally do it for rental property. And that's what most people are doing it for, so that they can have rental property. People want this rental property. Good question. Yeah. So absolutely you can use it for rental property.
And I'm seeing some more questions in terms of, can you add an ADU onto an R2 lot that currently has an SFR? So in the end, you have 3 units. Again, I'm going to defer back to Florentine's first presentation that she did, because she went into a whole slide of that. So go over to our YouTube channel. It's worth it to take a peek at that. What else do we have on here real quick, because I want to be cautious of everybody's time. If there is a legal 4-unit with a bootleg unit, is it possible or feasible to convert a bootleg to an ADU?
Yes. It is totally possible. There's just a process that we have to go through. And I sped through that. So normally I like to kind of highlight that and outline that. But there is a process that we can go through to get that bootleg permitted. And I highly, highly recommend it. It will cost money, but it's so worth it in the long run for the client.
And then Latasha, I see, can you give me an estimate of how much a property will increase in value or an ADU? Yes, call Florentine. She will help you get a consult. I'm telling you, this lady is worth her $250 consult fee because you are just a plethora of information and you really know your stuff. And that's about it for the questions. What is this last screen you want to show everybody on here?
So we've created, since our last call, I wanted to make this easy for all of us. We created a realtors only. So if you go to sidekick.homes and then /realtors only, okay, just for you guys. You can't navigate on our site and find this. This is just for you, realtors only. So on this page, if you guys sign up, you will be on a mailing list for us to just send you all of the information that we covered today. So if you want a copy of my slides, we will send you a copy of the slides. At the same for the 2020 update, I promise that to people and I will get it to you. The one-on-one, everyone's sending me a request for slides. I can't keep up. I got swamped last time and I just about had to shut my email down because I couldn't, it was too much. So we're super, super busy right now with helping people get their ADUs built. And I want to get you this information. The easiest way for me to do it is send an email out to everybody all at one time. So I'm going to be doing that. If not this weekend, I'll do it on Monday. So if you can just please go in and just type in your information, say that yes, you agree to receive information. I promise I won't spam you. I will only send you highly, highly, highly valuable, relevant information to help your clients. But I need your permission. If I can't mass send something to a whole bunch of people all at one time, unless I have your permission to do so. So I need you to say, yes, indeed, please send me the good stuff, and I will send it to you. And this is for realtors only. There's other places that we provide information to homeowners, but I really want our real estate professionals very well prepared. And so there's higher level information that you need to know that I don't think the average homeowner necessarily has capacity for. So that's that.
One last fire round question. The minimum square footage for an ADU, is that 800 square feet?
It depends. It really, really depends. So it depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the parameters that they say. 800 square feet is the most that you can build without having to take into consideration the lot coverage, the floor area ratio, and the the open space requirements, et cetera. But you may be able to build more. If those zoning parameters, if you're able to meet those zoning parameters and build more. So it depends. It depends on the local ordinance, and is the local ordinance up to speed with the state guidelines.
Perfect.
Yeah. And if somebody wants a better, I know that's not much of an explanation, but the first presentation really covered that in tremendous detail. So
yes. So let me give a couple more things here. Some people are asking. So your website is sidekick.homes. That's where
correct.
You can find all of her information, reach out to her. And then this is the realtors only portal. And then again, if you really want those slides, especially from the last one, do it the way I do it sometimes on these webinars. We have so much time in quarantine. Go watch our YouTube video and take screenshots. Just take the screenshots, organize it. We all have plenty of time at home. Quarantine.
Right.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
You are so welcome.
You are such a master at this, and I definitely will be using you for all of my clients who are interested in this. And thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for spending your time with us. So grateful. Very much appreciated.
Wonderful. Have a good one. Everybody.
Right.
Go.
Everybody.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Rita.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Nikki.